tomorrow, big day, obviously. I mean, in some respects, it's really just, I don't know if it's going to be a big day. We may not know the results that we want to know until Wednesday or Thursday, for that matter.
Yeah, Fetterman's team's already kind of sending out warnings to voters in Pennsylvania. We're probably not going to know the results for a while.
Pennsylvania is one of those states where Republicans have sued to disqualify thousands of ballots because of a failure to put the date on the outside of the ballot, even though these ballots have already arrived in front of on Tuesday, right? I mean, the purpose of the date is to make sure that they have voted in time. If the ballots are all there, they could easily be certified as arrived before the election. Federal courts may have an issue with that because technicalities are not supposed to disqualify ballots. And prior to the day, November 8th this year, the dating on these ballots is a technicality, right? Because they know, election officials know that these ballots are in before November 8th. However, we shall see. I mean, we mentioned a couple of weeks ago that in Wisconsin, there were heavily Republican counties where Republican officials are saying vote on day of. And now we see they are suing to get rid of some of the early ballots. So this is one of the strategies. And remember, these are states where, at least in the context of the presidential elections, you're talking 10,000, 20,000, maybe 40,000 max are the differences. And think about that in terms of like a congressional race where, 1,000 votes could easily make the difference in a couple of these congressional races. So stay tuned for that. One of the things that we talked about on Friday with Digby was what we were seeing from the mainstream media in framing this election like it's an absolute done deal for the Republicans, both the House and the Senate. And there's been an influx of crappy polls, and the right has been pushing this narrative. And one of the things that Digby pointed out was that, what this does is it sets the Republican voter up for the narrative that if this isn't a big night for Republicans tomorrow night, then it's a function of voter fraud. And here is Ben Shapiro, the Pope of the Jews, here to make a proclamation that indeed, yes, if Republicans don't win tomorrow, big, that's going to be very suspicious.
Now, it's important to remember here, for those who don't understand how percentages work, 55% shot does not mean 100% shot. People tend to think, well, at 49% shot, Republicans were going to take the Senate. This means they'll definitely lose the Senate. At 51%, that means they'll definitely take the Senate. No, it means that if you run the simulation 100 times, Republicans win in 55 of them, but in 45, Democrats win. So, pretending that this thing is a surefire bet for Republicans is wrong. However, is the momentum with the Republicans? Absolutely. The momentum is with the Republicans, and this is why Democrats are spending heavily in blue areas, why Republicans are spending almost nothing in red areas. And, again, it's going to be fascinating to see what happens because so many of these races are apparently close. It feels like the momentum is moving all in one direction. With that said, a lot of these polls are still extraordinarily close.
I mean, let's honestly, okay? I know that we talk about this in those terms too, but what does it mean to feel like the momentum is going in one direction?
Well, he says that after he says it's absolutely on the Republican side. So it feels like, and it's also absolutely a fact.
It's absolutely feeling like it.
He's not Dave Weigel, like on the campaign trail, kind of getting a sense that, neither are we, but that's why we have Dave Weigel on to talk about that. Like his sense of the momentum is just, inherently
his spidey senses are picking this up. Now, I should say, Washington Post ABC poll came out today. Basically, it was like 49-48, well within the margin of error of, are you going to vote for a Republican or you vote for a Democrat? I mean, so, and he's even saying, it's really, really close, but it absolutely feels like something. But you know what, Ben? Someone once said, facts don't care about your feelings. Continue.
It's going to be fascinating to see what happens because so many of these races are apparently close. It feels like the momentum is moving all in one direction. With that said, a lot of these polls are still extraordinarily close. So if there's a polling error in the other direction, theoretically, the red wave could founder. I will say one thing that's going to be very dangerous for the country. There's a widespread perception that Republicans are going to kick ass in the House and that they are likely to take the Senate at this point. If suddenly this turns into a wipeout in favor of Democrats, if you're worried about election denial and you're worried about people not trusting the results of elections, if people go to bed on Tuesday night thinking the Republicans have won, and by Wednesday morning, Democrats have picked up a bunch of seats and the red wave has foundered on the rocks, there's going to be a lot of discontent in this country, and it's going to be driven by a lot of the media coverage of what's going on so far,
like you,
as well as a lot of uncertainty about how votes are even tabulated.
Luckily, you have a platform with millions and millions of viewers, Ben, where you can correct the record and say that is just the trajectory of votes being counted.
Yeah, it sounds like your problem, Ben. Like,
right.
Deal with your audience.
I mean, why are you stepping back away from it and saying, well, some people are going to be feeling this? Well, then you have a responsibility as the truth teller who's giving people facts to give them the facts of the situation and how votes are going to be tabulated.
I mean, it is it's also, we should remember, like, when the last election that we had in 2000, and it felt like, we saw what happened in California.
Yeah.
In terms of, I mean, so we know that he knows that, in fact, people are going to go to bed thinking that Republicans did better than they did, because we now know that the Republicans had a specific strategy not to vote early. Those ballots are tabulated often after the fact because Republican legislators have made it impossible by statute to count these ballots before Election Day. And so they know that the Democratic votes are going to come in later. And he knows that people are going to go to bed and things will probably look better for Democrats. It could look just horrible for Democrats and a little bit less horrible by the next day. But in terms of a trend, to the extent that past is any sort of like indication as to what's going to happen in this election, we know that things are going to get a little bit better for Democrats over the course of that evening into the next morning. So he knows that's going to happen. And it's like this sort of like vague, I don't know, I can't tell if it's like a threat or if it's like some type of like encouragement that people should be outraged. Like, here's your license to be outraged if you don't like the way that votes are counted. And yes, when you talk about the media narrative, dude, I mean,
you can combat it then. You don't need to kind of just view it through this kind of passive lens. Just tell us the facts, Ben. That's
right,
what you're here for.
Exactly. Continue.
There's going to be a lot of discontent in this country, and it's going to be driven by a lot of the media coverage of what's going on so far, as well as a lot of uncertainty about how votes are even tabulated in states like Pennsylvania, which takes like days and days and days to tabulate the votes.
Because of a law passed by the Republican Pennsylvania legislature. That's why. And he knows it. That's why Fetterman has been out there saying like this may take a while because he's trying to change expectations. But to the extent that he's blaming the media narrative, which he has already said feels like there's Republican momentum, you're the one promoting that narrative. It's fascinating that he can to have both those things go on simultaneously is impressive.